وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين أما بعد وقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. On this very special occasion, I would like to wish you all Khushali Mubarak. We are marking the Wiladat of a remarkable lady who left a deep imprint in Islamic history, and especially as a role model for women who aspire to have a voice. Indeed, for a woman in that culture, in those days, let us not forget, to be able to stand up in front of men and to speak out and stand up for the truth was a remarkable achievement. Because in those days, as you are aware, women did not have a voice, much less a voice in public. And especially as she was not normally, the normal traditional chador had been removed from her head. But had it not been for Zainab, we would not have heard about Imam Hussein, as we are aware. I want to talk about Hazrat Zainab during the second part of my speech. But the first part is devoted to something more contemporary, because Islam is not a religion of the past, as we are aware. It's something which is connected to our lives. The question that often arises is, how do we live out Islam in modern times, especially in North America? Let's not forget, Islamic law did not come about overnight. We have so many laws that we abide by. Those laws were formulated with time. They were interpreted. And therefore, how do we reinterpret? Do we need to reinterpret Islamic law in modern times? After all, when you look at it logically, there are many issues and challenges that we face here in Canada which were never there in the past. Therefore, for example, there is no Islamic law on trade unions, because there were no trade unions in those days. How about IVF, in vitro fertilization, where either a woman cannot conceive or you have test tube babies, etc. We have other elements which are involved in the birth of a child. Now, what does Islam have to say about that? These and many other questions. How about serving in the military, in the judiciary, in the West? Because as I said, the law, Islamic law, was formulated when Muslims were in the majority. And therefore, the challenges that Muslims faced in those days are very different from those that we face today. In particular, issues regarding, for example, whether it is a lottery, is it really a form of gambling? Questions of investment in bonds, mutual funds, and so many other things which come about in contemporary times. Peer pressure and so many other things, as I say, that Muslims never had to face. But to start with Islamic law itself, we have to realize, contrary to what we may think, the Prophet was not given a law ready-made on a diskette by Jibreel. In fact, many of you may be aware, some of you may not be aware, many of Islamic laws were actually pre-Islamic law. Islam came with a particular framework, and I think it's very important for us to remember this. The Quran is not a legal document. You don't find all the do's and don't do the details in the Quran, correct? The Quran is not a historical document. It doesn't tell us full of history. It tells us stories. It doesn't tell us histories. History starts from A to Z or Z, whereas a story is just a little part of that history to drive a moral point. The Quran is a moral document. It's a document of how to live morally, ethically. And therefore, what the Quran stated was, even if a law is pre-Islamic, as long as it does not go or violate the ethical norms, the moral norms of the Quran, it is acceptable. And many a time, there are few changes to it. And I'll give you examples to show how practical Islam is. Unfortunately, contrary to us, we tend to think that something is American, therefore it's un-Islamic. Canadian, un-Islamic. That's a wrong concept. Islam was very practical. It did not introduce a series of new laws. There were certain laws, yes, it did institute. For example, before Islam, as we are aware, the Arabs would practice female infanticide, meaning that if a person had too many baby girls, they would bury the baby alive. Now this was clearly inhumane. So Islam prohibited it right immediately. But this is not acceptable. You cannot bury a child simply because it is female. In those days mentality, you needed a female only to produce a male. So women were seen as liability. Islam elevated the position of women. However, there are certain laws that Islam accepted. For example, the issue of marriage, marital laws. Most of them Islam accepted. Tweak them a little bit. Change them a little bit. Mahr, for example. I hope you all have paid your mahr to your wives. Eh? If you don't, then today you're in trouble tonight. In any case then, in the olden days, the mahr was paid to the bride's father. And Islam came and said, no, the mahr system itself is okay, it's good. But it should be paid to the bride, not to the bride's father. Similarly, the question of diya, blood money. The question is, if somebody in the family is killed, then what do? Do you actually take revenge against that person? Or can you ask for blood money? This question of blood money was there even before Islam. Yes, Islam did institute certain laws, certain changes within that system. But overall, we find even in business transaction, business laws, laws on, for example, partnership, these were all pre-Islamic. What does this tell us? Just because something is pre-Islamic, it does not mean it's un-Islamic. It all depends on whether it falls within the framework of the Quran. Similarly, we tend to think that just because something is foreign to Islam, it is against Islam. That's again our misconception and our mistake. In fact, non-Islamic does not mean un-Islamic. There are so many things which are non-Islamic which Islam borrowed. And again, it kept that framework in mind. As long as it's not against the ethical framework, as long as it's acceptable to people of rational minded, people of reason, people of ethics, then it is okay. Again, I'll give you some examples to be absolutely clear. For example, the whole concept of what we call the gumbad, the dome, qubba. The dome was not there during the time of the Prophet or the Imams, but the Muslims have accepted it. It probably, maybe came from the Turks. But just because it came from the Turks, who at that time not even Muslims, doesn't mean that it's un-Islamic. So Islam accepted it. The whole issue of minaret. Minaret, again, was borrowed and invented later on, probably during the time of the Umayyads or Abbasids. In fact, if you have been to Samarra, you will notice there is a big mosque in Samarra. We don't go there these days because of security reasons, but it was at one time the biggest mosque in the world during the time of the 9th and 10th Imams. It was there during the 10th Imam's time. You'll find a minaret there which is spiral. They invented a spiral minaret. And because in those days, in order to be heard, the muazzin had to go to the top. There were no loudspeakers. And the joke is, by the time the guy got up there, when he came down, it was time to go up again. So they told him to just stay there, because it was a pretty long minaret. It is still there today. The point being that this minaret concept was not Islamic, in the sense that it was foreign to Islam. But Islam incorporated and accepted it. Even issues like the hilal, the crescent that we use as our symbol. Again, it was not there during the time of the Prophet. And one could go on and on and on into so many things. This is why, by the way, you will find diversity within Islam. Diversity does not mean just because something is different, therefore it is against Islam. Even the question of the mosque itself. I assure you, you go to a mosque in China, it's going to be very different from the mosque in Timbuktu. And it's going to be different from the mosque in Canada, for example. You go to China, there are actually dragons outside the mosque, because the Chinese, what we call custom is the dragons protect people. So that's become part of an Islamic phenomenon there. You go to Timbuktu, you may have seen pictures of it, the mosque have got spikes coming out of those mosques. Because that is the way of architecture in Timbuktu. You go to India, there is what we may call a syncretism, whereby Hindu and Islamic and Buddhist architect have framed a particular way of architecture, and so on. What does this tell us? Is that Islam is very vibrant. Islam is very flexible. And in many a time, the Islamic law itself was connected with local culture. Isn't that something phenomenal for us to understand? That sometimes it varied according to culture, according to times. Because Islam was responding to times. Islam is not this monolithic, one-sided, one way of looking at things. Let's get that out of our minds. To give you an example, we're talking of during the time of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam. Supposing you have a girl, I may have given this example to you before, but if I did, excuse me, but it's important for us to understand the vibrancy, and then we'll talk about modern time. If there was a girl living in Medina, if she found a cool Muslim dude that she wants to marry, the question is, does she need the permission of her father or not? Well, the law depended on where you were. Because in Medina, Medina was very conservative. The law there, the predominant law was not Ja'fari law, it was Maliki law. Because Malik used to live in Medina. But if the same girl, so if she wanted to marry this cool dude, she couldn't do it in Medina. But if she was in Kufa, there the law was different. Because the predominant law there was the Hanafi law of Abu Hanifa. And Abu Hanifa, by his own opinion, right or wrong is a different issue, he opined and he believed that no, she does not need the permission of her guardian. As long as she is what we call Rashida, or in other words, somebody who is capable of discerning what is right and wrong, she could take care of her affairs. It is good to get the permission of the guardian, which is normally the father, but she doesn't need to. So sometimes a woman just change her mazhab from Maliki to Hanafi in order to get married. It's what we call cafeteria Islam, you know. You pick and choose what you like. That's wrong, by the way. But in any case, it happened. What does that tell us was how Islamic law was able to come up with different eras and change. To give you another example, how even the ulama have changed, and you know, excuse me for saying this, but it's a fact. And you're welcome to check with any scholar, and it goes to show how even ulama have changed with time. I'm just finished writing an article. Believe it or not, sometimes you get these crazy ideas as a scholar. You run off ideas of what to write on. I've just finished writing an article on turbans. Can you believe it? Huh? Amame. Actually, it's called imama. In any case, the question, my own curiosity was, where did this black and white turban start from? As you are aware, the Sayyids wear black turbans, non-Sayyids wear white turbans. Now, this is not disrespect to anybody. It's purely an intellectual curiosity on my part. To my great surprise, I found out that during the time of the Prophet himself and the Imams wore different kinds of turbans. Their colors were different. Depending on where they were going or what they felt like, the Prophet was wearing sometimes green turban, he would wear yellow turban, he was wearing white turban, he was wearing a black turban too. Imam Ali on his deathbed was wearing a yellow turban. When Imam asked Imam Ar-Radha to go, remember the coronation in Marv, the public coronation, he was wearing a white turban. There are some reports that when our 12th Imam comes back, he'll wear a green turban, and so on. In other words, the color of the turban wasn't important in those days. And what's more, even the way of wearing the turban, they used to actually let one part hang on the front and another part at the rear. Even the Imams did that. And they would put another part, what is called tahtul hanak, under the chin. This was their custom in those days. And there's nothing wrong in that, right? But it was only much later on, probably about 150, 200 years ago, that the Sadat of the ulama decided that they wanted to wear black in order to identify themselves as Sadat, as descendants of the Prophet. Whereas the majority of the people in Iran, in those days almost everybody was wearing a turban. Huh? Just like Afghanistan today, if you look at pictures of Afghanistan, just because he's wearing a turban doesn't mean he's a mullah. Everybody's a mujtahid there. But the truth is, that's their culture. That was the custom. Even in Iran, people used to wear predominantly white turbans because that was the custom in those days in Iran. We're talking of 200 years ago. The ulama, the sayyids, in order to distinguish themselves, realized that they wanted to wear a black turban. It's a long history behind it. We don't need to go into the details. But what this tells us is how that particular custom became something very prominent. But people used to laugh at those people who would put their turban, tie the turban under their neck. So the ulama abandoned that sunnah. Even though there are so many hadith saying that you whenever you wear a turban, put it under your neck. What's called tahtul hanak or tahannuk. But that was abandoned because people would scoff and ridicule. So a custom which was at one time very prominent, very important. If you look at the old pictures or old paintings of Arab during the time of the Prophet, you'll find them with the adhaba, the tail in the front, and a part of the turban under their necks. You don't see that anymore. Sometimes you will see some Maulanas, when they're leading prayers, they will open a part of their turban and put it under the neck. But that's where they're supposed to do it all the time, by the way. What does this goes to show is the influence of culture in how people dress and how people behave. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Coming to modern times then, we should not, as I said, think of Islam as this static thing. On the contrary, our scholars, our maraja, are continuously asked about certain questions. And these are online these days. The beauty of the things is everything is online these days. A lot of them on the websites of the ulama, including Ayatollah Sistani, Ayatollah Sanai, Fadlallah, whoever you can think of, Khamenei, they are all online and in English too. In English also, many of them. And people are asking all these questions. And the ulama, our maraji, are responding accordingly. So for example, you have questions, as I said, on trade unions, questions on IVF. The ulama have responded accordingly. Islamic law, as I said, cannot be completely static. Otherwise, it stops responding to the needs of the people. You have, and again I may have cited this example, if I have you'll forgive me, but for the benefit of those who have not heard it. In today's world, there are astronauts who are Muslims. There are Shias, by the way, who have if not piloted, then at least directed spacecrafts in outer space. I've known them, Shia girls within our own community. That goes to show who have worked for NASA. It goes to show how, alhamdulillah, vibrant and how educated our own girls are. It's a matter of pride. Huh? You may remember about a couple of months, 3 months ago, there was one spacecraft which went near Jupiter and then evaporated into space. One of our sisters, whom I know very well, she was one of those who actually guided the spacecraft to Jupiter. It goes to show, alhamdulillah, how much pride we should take. In any case, then, suppose you have a Muslim astronaut who decides to go in space, and of course we have to pray 5 prayers every day. The question is, where is Qibla from up there? Somewhere down there on the earth, okay. And supposing if you can keep your feet on the ground, because when you are up there orbiting, you know, it's jihad just to keep your feet on the ground, because you're floating about all over in the air. Supposing you can do that also, the question is, how do you pray? Because when you are orbiting the earth at that speed, your day lasts 90 minutes. Every 90 minutes you see a sunrise and sunset. Now we are supposed to pray 5 times every 90 minutes. Now if you pray 5 times every 90 minutes, by the time you finish your Maghrib, it's time to start your Zohar. You finish your Zohar, it's time to Asr. Asr you finish, so it comes on Maghrib, Isha, Maghrib and Isha. So what's the point even more going up there? You might as well stay here, because all you're doing is just praying all the time. It's a practical question. And the ulama were asked about it. Ayatollah al-Khuy, for example. I believe even Ayatollah Sistani gave the fatwa that no, you don't pray 5 times every 90 minutes. You space out your day over 24 hours, and then you will then apportion your prayers accordingly. That makes sense. A similar thing happens when you are living in the North Pole. You know, I don't know why you would want to go there, but there is actually a mosque in Iqalut. You know where is Iqalut? In Nunavut, I believe, in that area. You can Google it, the Mosque of the Midnight Sun. There's over 100 Muslims there. It is so cold in the Arctic that they could not build a mosque there. They had to build it in Winnipeg and take it about 4,000 kilometers up there. Now, again, how do you pray there when the sun doesn't rise or sun doesn't set? How do you fast there? The ulama have responded to such issues too. And there are differences between them, by the way. And those differences are not weaknesses. It's a point of strength. It shows mental thinking, ijtihad, that our ulama are not static. On the contrary, they're very, very vibrant. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alihi. And in many ways, I think that you find our ulama are very, very vibrant in the sense that if you go and talk to Ayatollah Sistani, and I've talked to him, you'll find that he knows a lot of what is happening here in the West. People tend to think that he's an old man sitting in a little home in Najaf. Well, he is an old man and he's sitting in a little home in Najaf, but he's fully aware. He reads a lot, he's fully compliant. Just give you an example that on my last trip, one of the persons who went with me in the summer was a Christian. This man called Andrew, he had not converted at all. And he told me that he wants to go. I said, fine, let's go. And when I took him to Ayatollah Sistani and I explained to him that this person is a Christian. The Ayatollah directed his office to give his Andrew a special ring, just as a token of appreciation that nobody got but just this man as a Christian. And then the Ayatollah started telling me about Christian beliefs, about Trinity, about resurrection, and so on. And I was surprised that this old man sitting here that we think only knows about do's and don't do's, is fully aware and conversant with Christian beliefs too. It's not that he's just talking about Islam. That goes to show, I think, that the capacity of our ulama and how they are thinking. In many ways, they're exploring new avenues. As our community settles in the West, as our community experiences new challenges, our ulama are responding to those challenges. We find, for example, not only issues on IVF, but various other issues regarding, for example, handshaking, which is, of course, a major issue. But our ulama are asked this, well, supposing I go for an interview, and if I don't shake hands with the opposite gender, I might be rejected. It might be seen as an insult. Under certain circumstances, we are allowed to do that, as long as it does not lead to what we may call lust. All in all, then, what we can see is that Islam, in order and always has been, to be able to incorporate newer times and newer circumstances, has opened itself to newer cultures and different ways of dressing, different ways of dealing with people. It is important for us to remember that the Quran was brought up, or the Quran encountered, shall we say, a pluralistic society where Muslims were living not only with Muslims, they were living with Jews, they were living with Christians, they were living with polytheists. And the Quran responded with that kind, bringing with it a very humanistic, pluralistic, diverse system. And therefore, the Quran says that do not even curse them. That is the polytheists. وَلَا تَسُبُّوا الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ. Do not curse those who believe in other gods. Because if you curse their gods, they will curse your God. And that will lead to more violence. The Quran doesn't like that. The Quran goes even further. See how it was able to incorporate different people and sometimes different cultures. That if you kill one innocent soul, فَخَنَّمَا قَتَلَ النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا, it's as if you've killed the whole of humanity. You kill one soul, you've killed the whole of humanity. You save one soul, you've saved the whole of humanity. Even when it comes to mushriks who come to seek asylum in your place, the Quran says, وَإِنْ أَحَدٌ مِّنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ إِسْتَجَارَكَ. If one of the mushriks comes seeking protection, the Quran says, you must protect them. حَتَّى يَسْمَعَ كَلَامَ اللَّهِ. So that they can hear the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, we become the vehicle through which Allah's message is passed to others. And that particular message applies to us also today, my sisters and brothers in Canada. That even we are living in Canada, we become the vehicle through which the message of Allah is imparted to non-Muslims through our action. And therefore, and I remember distinctly, Ayatollah Sistani told us this, the whole majma when we were there. He says, remember what Imam as-Sadiq says, that you kunu du'ana bi al-sinatikum, bi a'malikum, that you should invite people with your actions, not just with your words. In other words, through you, people remember and understand and comprehend the words of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala. Within the next few minutes that I have left, I want to talk a little bit about Hazrat Zainab. It is because we are marking her Wiladat today. She is normally remembered as a heroine, or some would say sheroine, of Karbala. But there is more to Zainab than that. Indeed, she was named by the Prophet himself. And Zainab was a person who was not only dedicated to the cause of her brother and her father, she was brought up in a culture of learning, because the key element in the Ahlul Bayt was always education, remember that. And therefore the title given to Hazrat Zainab was Alima Ghayla Mu'allam. She was an Alima without being taught, without having a teacher. There are various anecdotes that whereas the Prophet was preaching in the mosque, Imam Hassan and Hussein were preaching to men. The one who was preaching to women after Hazrat Fatima was Zainab. So many a time she would invite the ladies of the community to her home. Let us not forget, many a time ladies have certain personal issues, personal questions that they feel embarrassed to ask the men. And the person who they would ask was through Zainab. Later on, by the way, we find this again and again through the lives of the Imams. When we look at the life of Hazrat Masuma alayhi salam, she leads the same kind of life, whereby the ladies would come to Hazrat Masuma in Qom, in Medina also, to ask her questions regarding Islamic law. But therefore, women have always played that very prominent role in Islam. Not only the question of learning, but even as a person of grandeur, of how to behave. Indeed, when Imam Ali alayhi salam moved to Kufa, Zainab moved with him. And then when it came to marriage, because there were people who wanted to get married to Zainab, but there was, what Imam Ali was teaching us is what qualities that we should look for. The quality that impressed him most was what we call kufu, compatibility with Abdullah ibn Ja'far. And that was generosity. Abdullah was quite rich, apparently. But what he was called Bahrul Jud. Abdullah was called the sea of generosity. He wasn't just generous. He was an ocean, if you like, of generosity. So Hazrat Zainab married him, but not for his wealth, as much as for his quality of sharing his wealth with others. And they led a very simple life, despite his level of economic level of upbringing and his level of living. At the same time, we find Zainab alayhi salam a mirror of saintly person. We believe that she is buried in Damascus. But if you go to Cairo, by the way, there is also a shrine of her in Cairo. I've been there. It's interesting to go. Most of the riwayat say that she is buried in Damascus. But there are some who say she was actually in Egypt. If you go to Egypt, you know, when we go to our shrine, we plead to our shrines, we plead to the Imams or those saintly figures, or we put letters in the shrine, we are told haram and bid'ah, astaghfirullah, this and that. You go to Cairo, the Sunnis are doing the same thing. There are no Shias as such today in Cairo, but the Sunnis are doing it. At this point, I'm reminded of a particular anecdote which I think that we should use, especially with those who tell us haram and bid'ah and everything. There was a great scholar who is buried in Najaf, Allama Sayyid al-Musawi, Sharafuddin al-Musawi. I was lucky enough to translate one of his books into English called Questions of Jurisprudence. He, that is Allama Musawi, Sharafuddin al-Musawi, is the author of Muraja'at. You may have read the title, a book called The Right Path. The Right Path is actually a translation of his Muraja'at. This is a debate and a discussion. And Allama, this great scholar, he was a very person who was very sensitive. He was never abusive to Sunnis. What he would do was he would respond from their books, not from our books. So there was a lot of discussion with Shias and Sunnis And Allama was a great scholar, was what we call in Urdu Hazir Jawab, you know, a person who was very witty, and he knew what to answer when. So one day he went for a pilgrimage, and in those days when you went for pilgrimage, the king would invite you for dinner if you were a scholar. So Sharafuddin al-Musawi Allama was invited also. When he went for the invitation in Mecca, he took a copy of the Quran with him. And he gave it to the king. When they came to meet the king, he gave the Quran to the king. The king, of course, took the Quran and he kissed it. Allama said, Astaghfirullah, haram, bid'at, haram. The king said, what do you mean? He says, you're kissing leather. After all, the cover of the Quran is made out of leather. You can use the leather for the Quran. You can even use it to make shoes or belt. Leather is leather. But the king says, you don't understand. I'm not kissing what is outside the Quran. I'm kissing what is inside the Quran. Nobody wants to kiss leather. Allama says, this is exactly what we do when we go to Medina and Karbala. Nobody wants to kiss metal and iron. What is inside them that we are kissing. Notice what is outside them. Sallu ala Muhammad wa. The point being that even when we go to the shrine of Hazrat Zainab, whether it is in Cairo or in Damascus, that's a different issue. The issue is what is inside it, that we are expressing our love and our reverence and our respect to Hazrat Zainab. There are many miracles that have been attributed and seen, some of them by myself, in Damascus itself, in the haram of Hazrat Zainab. Not only that, there is such a thing called Baraka in Islam. Baraka, what we call grace or blessings, is not only on people who are alive. Baraka can also be on a month. That's why we call Mahe Mubarak Ramazan. Mubarak means that month which is blessed. La Sharqiya, La Gharabiya, as the Quran tells us, that it is a blessed olive tree. Shajaratun Mubarakatun Zaytunati, a blessed olive tree in Surah An-Nur. That even the tree is blessed, is Mubarak. And therefore, if we find that a person who is saintly, a person who has led an upright life, if Allah blesses that person not only in this life, but even in the hereafter, then we should not be surprised. Because barakah is something, it comes from Allah, and from that person is transmitted to others too. And this is what we find in the case of Hazrat Zainab. It's because of her saintliness, because of her piety. One or two other points before I finish about Hazrat Zainab. One other important point was that she was trained by Imam Ali. One of the key points is, if you know, this called Nahjul Balagha, is the path of eloquence. Imam Ali was very eloquent in what he spoke. He did not need to look at notes like me many a time. It came out automatically. And Hazrat Zainab picked up that art from him. She was what we call fasiha, means she could articulate herself very easily. And she could speak very easily. And therefore, in the darbar of Ibn Ziyad, I don't wish to recite the Masaib, but just a point of how eloquent Hazrat Zainab was. When Ibn Ziyad was speaking, the person who stood up to respond to him was Hazrat Zainab. And somebody had to respond. Because if nobody responded, then it would seem that Ibn Ziyad was correct and victorious. When Hazrat Zainab started speaking, Ibn Ziyad was not aware who this person was. He asked, who is this lady who is speaking like this? And they said, this is Zainab bint Ali. Zainab, the daughter of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And you know what Ibn Ziyad says? He says, she speaks like her father. She talks like her father. Her father used to speak like that. And the same thing in the darbar of Yazid too. So powerful and so moving were her speeches in different parts, by the way. Not only in the courtroom, but even when she enters Kufa, those people who are rejoicing start crying when they hear Zainab and Kulthum, by the way. Kulthum also was very eloquent, and she spoke many a time. We don't hear about that. Inshallah, in some other majlis, we'll talk about Kulthum. And then Zainab goes to Damascus. What is interesting is that when Zainab enters Damascus, the ladies are rejoicing. They are very happy, thinking that this rebel group has been brought here. But when Zainab is leaving Damascus, those same ladies are crying. They come and give her condolences, the pursa as we call. This is the power of Zainab. Whereas Hussein alayhi salam moved people with his sword, the battle of Zainab was with her words. And the words, by the way, are more powerful than the sword. Did we know that? The words are more powerful than the sword. Why? Because the sword can touch and cut the skin, the outside. The words can pierce the heart and the soul of human beings. And what hits the soul remains and moves and touches. That's why, by the way, when Saddam, if you recall, Saddam, he murdered Shaheed Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr in 1980. But it wasn't only him, also his sister. Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, Shaheed, had a sister called Bint al-Huda, who was also very eloquent, by the way, who wrote many stories. One of the persons who came out in Najaf, a lady, we're talking of 1980s, during the time of Saddam, and who spoke out against Saddam was this Bint al-Huda. Her name was Amina. She spoke out against Saddam. And therefore, when Saddam killed Shaheed Muhammad Baqir Sadr, he said, I will not make the same mistake as Yazid did. Yazid left Zainab alone, and Zainab was able to spread the message of Hussein. And therefore, even Bint al-Huda, she was also killed by Saddam. If you go to Najaf, you will see their graves in Wadi al-Salam. In total, then, we can say that Hazrat Zainab alayhi salam played a major role, not only in her own time, but also for posterity. It is because of this that today we find that thousands, sometimes millions of pilgrims go to her shrine in Damascus and cry not only for her, but for the legacy that she left behind us. A legacy of a woman who was not only noble, not only saintly, but more than anything, courageous and brave. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.